What's up everybody, welcome back to a brand new video on Lexalexus. I'm back with an original video, which I never thought I would do. Original video, not really, but it's a video that's not a predictions video. It will be quite refreshing for you guys. Today, I'm going to give you my updated championship table, because the season has started, with about 10 games in, and there's definitely some teams that I would consider changing and moving a couple of places. So it should be for good fun. Let me know, guys, in the comments down below, which team have you got right and wrong so far, and what would be your updated table, or what would be the teams that you're going to change the most. I'll be very interested to know. If you guys like what you see, please give the video a like. It does tremendously help the growth of this channel. Please do hit that subscribe button, as we're really trying to push for 2,000 subscribers. We're not too far away from that, so guys, please continue showing your support, liking, subscribing. All of that really helps. And to continue the growth, please also continue to share the channel as well. All of that helps as well. But without any further ado, let's start reviewing what changes I will make to my table championship predictions. So guys, what I'm going to show you now is that on both screens on the left hand side, you're going to see my original championship predictions, and on the right hand side, you're going to see the current championship table going into this international break. And you can definitely see that there's been a couple of teams that I've got relatively wrong. Couple stand out. Definitely Coventry's one I've got very wrong at this moment of time. Rotherham, I dare say, is very, very wrong as well. Sunderland, I've definitely underestimated by the looks of things. Middlesbrough, definitely overestimated in some way. So it's fair to say there's a lot of teams that I definitely need to move. So without any further ado, let's actually show you my updated table. Starting off at the bottom of the championship, which I think is really tricky, this year. Because the bottom of the championship currently is Coventry, but I don't necessarily see them as a team that's going to be cut away. Unless they don't start winning in the next 4 or 5 games, then I think Coventry have got a very serious danger of replicating what Barnsley did last year. I, however, think this year, bottom of the table is going to be Huddersfield Town. Now, that can change depending who they bring in as their manager. Because I pre-record most of my videos these days, it wouldn't even surprise me that this video goes out and Huddersfield have already got a new manager. But as of recording, Huddersfield do not have a managerial replacement. They wanted David Wagner, but there is very big problems about his work permit. So they're looking to Michael Carrick as a potential second choice option, which honestly, I don't know if it's going to be a bit too much of a risk. I think Huddersfield definitely need a manager with safe hands that can definitely secure them safety in the championship. They're not really, cut adrift from the bottom three as of yet, but you wouldn't expect to be in around this early part of the season. But if they don't get a manager soon and they rely on these same players to potentially get something, I don't see this squad potentially having enough within them to survive, unfortunately. So for me, 24th is going to Huddersfield Town. 23rd place for me is a team that's currently not in the bottom 3, but I'm predicting that they may have a slight drop off, and that is Birmingham City. I'm still not too sure on them at the moment. They've won 3 games so far this season in their opening 10 games. They have only lost 4 games in their opening 10 though, which is definitely a lot more better than I was expecting. They had a stage, of 3 defeats in a row where they were really struggling, but then in their last 3 games, they've actually been unbeaten, and, they kept 2 clean sheets in those last 3 games as well. My issue is I still not too sure about the goals. They've only scored 8 goals so far this season. Very few teams have actually scored less than 10 goals so far this season. So I do think that can be a problem. I think their transfers are great, but they have got players that can tend to pick up long-term injuries. I think of Christian Bielik being a good example of those as well. If one of those crucial players does have a long-term injury, I don't really see Birmingham relying on much more of that squad that can uplift them with that same amount of quality. And that's my personal opinion. I'm more than happy to be proven wrong though, because I do see Birmingham a bit of an underdog this season, and I'll be very pleased for them if they do survive. But for me, I think they'll be 23rd, but I'm not too sure on this one, I've got to be honest at the moment. 22nd and 21st were really close, literally margins, and was separating those two teams. I had to pick one though, and for me, I'm actually going to say Coventry are going down. This might be arguably the shock of the video, considering what Coventry were last year, but we saw it with Barnsley that a lot can change in a year. And one big issue for Coventry this season that I've noticed is that they've continued with their trend of missing gilt-edged chances. I think their XG would say that, despite only playing 7 games so far this season, they should do better than the games that they have been going. I've not seen an average XG yet, but in terms of the total XG, Coventry actually had the less, but that's because they've only played 7 games so far this season. Guarantee if we had an average XG, Coventry I think will be a lot higher up compared to all of the teams in the Championship. They have had back-to-back draws, but back-to-back draws is not going to cut it if you're trying to survive. And right now, Coventry are on 3 points and are currently 7 points of safety. Yes, 3 games in hand. If they win 2 of them, they're only 1 point of safety. So a small turnaround and even catching up with their games can definitely turn this around for Coventry. But for what I've seen, I think defensively they're not as strong as they were. They've conceded 13 goals in their 7 games, so that's nearly 2 goals conceded per game. So defensively they're not as strong because they've let go the likes of Clark Salter and Ostergaard, who have been really big parts of that back line for Coventry there. And I don't think they replace them with good enough quality. So I think defence is going to be an issue, and attack really needs to be performing or overperforming in a way like compared to what they did last year if they want to be up the table. So I hate to break it to Matt and any other Coventry fan, but I do think Coventry may go down, may be easily wrong. And as I would say, if they can pick up their form, I think they can definitely have the momentum to turn this around. But if they're still in this predicament going into the World Cup, I'd start being concerned, honestly. 21st place, therefore, is going to Rotherham. Now, Rotherham have had a good start to the season so far, a brilliant start. I've not remembered Rotherham having a stronger start like this. I remember the last time I covered Rotherham, they did all right, but they were not like anywhere near top half. Rotherham are 8th place with 10 games being played, which is incredible, really. Only 1 defeat that they've had in their opening 9 games as well, which was against Sunderland, which we've learned how good Sunderland been. That's no disgrace losing now in that way. So Rotherham have done really good job for themselves. Their issue is, though, is that they have managed to draw 5 games. They've drawn more than half of their games, so definitely an issue for getting the difference between a draw and a win. And they've just lost their manager, Paul Warne. He has gone back down to League One to help Derby County. I mean, as a decision, it may seem baffling, but for me, I can understand how he can look at Derby being a more attractive project and proposition right now. I feel like he's looked at Rotherham thinking he's taken them to the best that he could. It just feels a little bit abrupt to leave them just starting on with the season. And for me, I think Rotherham will suffer that. I do think they will drop off, and quite dramatically, without the influence that Paul Warne has had over this Rotherham team. But I do think with the start that it had so far, and even the players actually, I think have really stepped up this year. And I do think their squad, for me, seeing how they've managed to play and compete, I think if they continue playing the same way, they've got what it takes Rotherham to survive. I've seen enough already, in my opinion. I know it's only 9 games, but you can only see for your own eyes. I watched Rotherham play Blackpool. I think it was actually Paul Warne's last game in charge of Rotherham as well, ironically. And it was a 3-0 win, and it was an incredible performance. It was very dull, for a lot of part of the game. But just the strike partnership, just the midfield, just being able to create that one chance. And when they go forward, they look very, very clinical. And that will be a very important asset for them going forward. So for me, they will have a really big decline. But I think they may have enough within their squad to survive. So might be another shock, but I'm predicting Rotherham to survive in the Championship based on what I've seen, despite the departure of Paul Warne to Derby. The next manager is going to be very, very key, though. That could definitely influence my decision to keep Rotherham in this league. Coming in at 20th place is Hull City. Now, I'm very disappointed in Hull. I remember putting Hull as a team that I wanted to really see if they were going to really explode to life this season. They were my one to watch team. But then I think I did this video with Matt where we were talking about a team that can really underperform, and Hull was one of the teams that he mentioned that they could have a great season, but they can also go the other way and, you know, touch relegation. And right now, Hull are exactly 20th place as I place them right now, because they've had 5 defeats in their last 6 games. So despite having a really good start to the season, in their last 6 games, they've lost 5 of them. And they're just really conceding so many goals. They've conceded 21 goals so far this season. I don't think any other team has conceded more goals than Hull City. So for me, the biggest issue is their defence. And if they don't sort that out, then I think Hull won't progress. And if anything, I think they will have to definitely try and tweak some things to make sure they ensure that survival. But I do think they do have enough within you, as long as Estupinian gets back to his goal scoring form as he has done in the starting couple of games. I think he'll do enough to keep Hull in the league. Coming in 19th place is Blackpool. Now, Blackpool in around 19th place is quite a similar placement to where I placed them in my predictions as well. It's a little bit higher than what I originally predicted Blackpool to finish in. And Blackpool at the moment are exactly 19th place as well. So for me, I think they will stick around in that position so far, because I do think Blackpool have got a bit of an inconsistency about them. But what I've seen already with Blackpool is that they're still able to try and get good results in very close games. I think of their great result that they had against QPR, for instance, where it was a game where they didn't really feel within it. But in terms of the outcome and the scoreline staying 0-0 for a long time, it could have really gone either way. And Blackpool making the difference in that. And I do think that belief comes from the manager. And I've got to give Michael Appleton some credit. I think a lot of us were predicting Appleton to have a really shoddy start, but I've got to say Blackpool 19th is pretty much what we'd mostly expect, really. So I think he's getting expectations, but in terms of exceeding them, I don't think he's quite done that yet. And honestly, I think the squad that he's got to mould with, I don't think they're going to really kick on from that 19th place. So for me, I think they'll stick around, but to survive, I think Blackpool will absolutely take that right now, based on the devastating news of their manager leaving, Neil Krejci, and of course losing a big player like Josh Bowler. Coming in at 18th place is Cardiff. Now, Cardiff are a very peculiar team to predict right now. So Cardiff are also in 18th place. So you can see a theme going that I'm actually predicting most of these teams just to kind of stick around in those positions. There will be some alterations coming a little bit later. I just think even despite if Cardiff get like a really good manager in, I just don't see enough, unfortunately, that I think they'll crack on for top half. They've definitely got more depth in that squad now, but what I've seen is that a couple of injuries really just takes the squad out of competing. And unfortunately, they did have a decent start, especially at home, but then Cardiff recently, they've lost 4 out of their last 5 games, and I think losing to Huddersfield was the last straw. Even their win against Middlesbrough, whilst they had a really good first half, second half they nearly threw it away as well. So arguably a little bit lucky for Cardiff to pick up the amount of points they have done in the last 6 games or so. So unfortunately for me, very similar reasons based on what I've seen, and even with the squad, I just don't think the quality's there. But that could easily be proven wrong with a really good manager, and honestly, you know, if they can actually have a good managerial bounce, who knows where Cardiff can finish. 17th place, probably a bit controversial, is Preston North End. So Preston are 15th at the moment. But I do think if they don't resolve this goal scoring problem, I think Preston will fall more likely than they will rise up the table again. You know, they can try and pride themselves with their back line. They have conceded the less goals in the league, Preston, with only 4 goals conceded in 10, which is unbelievable. It's less than 0.5 goals conceded a game, but their goal scoring form is less to be desired as well, with only 3 goals scored in 10 games, with a 30% chance that Preston are going to score in any game that they play, and that is not good odds at all, especially if you want to be a highly competitive championship team. So I do think those problems, and especially if it's not addressed in the January transfer window, I think Preston will stick around in this mediocre position. Preston fans, if you're watching, let me know what you think with a 17th place finish. Is that there based on what you've seen in the moment? Next on the list is Wigan Athletic, another team which I've changed quite a fair bit from my start of the season predictions. And I think Wigan, honestly, I've really underestimated them. I think them and Rotherham have been two teams that definitely have really surprised me. And in general, all three of the recently promoted teams from League One have definitely surprised me. There's been this sort of trend that the quality between the Championship and League One is getting a little bit closer by each time you've seen the top six of League One kind of competing around a similar level of the bottom half of the Championship. But even with that, Wigan have picked up some really, really good results. They've picked up 3 wins in their opening 9 games so far. They are bang slap in the middle of the table with 13 points so far, 12th place at the moment. My only concern with Wigan is their very poor home record. They've not picked up a win so far at home. In their most recent home game, they lost out 1-0 to Reading, which Reading have only picked up 1 away win going up into this game. So Wigan, with their poor home form, could definitely hinder them finishing any higher. Maybe I could have even predicted Wigan to finish a little bit lower. But based on what I've seen with the performances, the players, and the potential I've seen from the manager, I think Wigan can definitely finish in a pretty safe position in the table and can definitely have the momentum to kick on for next season. This means 15th place for me is Reading. Now, definitely the biggest mover so far in terms of my predictions, especially with teams I've predicted, in the bottom part of the table. Reading were down as 22nd in my original predictions to go down and relegated. I've now pushed them 7 places up the table. Now, people could say that maybe that's a bit excessive, and people would say, oh, Reading are just having another great start to the season, a bit similar to when Panovic had his first full season as Reading manager. Reading are currently 3rd place in the table with 6 wins so far. Most of them, in fact, 4 of those 6 wins coming at their home games. They've almost had a 100% home record. That record, abruptly ending in a way where they played against Sunderland when they lost 3-0. But they've now started to pick up wins away from home. A 1-0 win against Millwall and a 1-0 win against Wigan Athletic as well. And what's shown me is that when their star players are fit, they have a really good team on their hands. And I've got to say, likewise with Appleton, I got to give Paul Ince some credit. I think those were 2 managers a lot of people were predicting to get sacked first. And they've more than done enough credit to even warrant a couple more games as management, especially Paul Ince, to get a Reading team, one of the bookings' favourites to get relegated, to be in 3rd place currently. Brilliant achievement. I don't think it will last. Injuries will definitely make this team drop down a bit. And maybe, a 12 pace drop is probably a bit harsh for me. But it is only 10 games into the season, and we have seen big turnarounds. It can happen, unfortunately. So I do think Reading will have a drop, but I don't think enough of a drop to consider them in a relegation battle, in my opinion. So for me, 15th place. Let me know what you think of that in the comments down below. 14th place in my table is Stoke, another team which I've not predicted any change in terms of the current Championship table with 10 games in. Stoke, for me, have always just cemented a team that are just going to be meandering in their mid-table position. There's been a couple of decent performances with Alex Neil, dare I say. That 3-0 win against Hull was decent, but then they followed that up with a disappointing 0-0 draw to QPR. Probably should have arguably got a better result in that. And Alex Neil has only picked up 1 win so far as Stoke City manager as well, and he's had up to 4 games to try and get something as well. So I wouldn't say he's completely kicked on. I definitely think he's improved a couple of things, but I definitely don't think he's going to be Stoke's answer to potentially get to where they want to be. I do think their expectations really do set them back, gives them a bit too much of a weight on their shoulders. And I think if Stoke can eliminate that, then I think Stoke can definitely kick on from that. But for me, I think it would just take a little bit of time for transition. So I'm going to say 14th place for Stoke City. 13th place in my table is Swansea City. Now, Swansea are currently 16th place. So I'm predicting Swansea to finish a little bit higher because I think Swansea have upped their performances a little bit recently. But likewise with Stoke, I just think they're too inconsistent for me to predict, them to finish any higher, unfortunately. They were a team, Swansea, which I expected to be a dark horse team to finish in around 7th place. And they still could. I'm going to say this again, only 10 games into the season, a lot can change. But as what I've seen for the first 10 games so far, I just think Swansea, who have got great players within them, Nathan Wood, I think deserves a big shout out. I just think they're too inconsistent. So for me, I do think they'll naturally cancel their good and their bad form and finish in around the middle average part of the table. once again, can be proven heavily wrong. It's just a matter of an opinion of what I've seen from Swansea so far. So I'm going to say Swansea are going to finish in 13th place. Coming in at 12th place is Millwall. Now, Millwall was another team in terms of my original predictions. I predicted quite a fair bit lower. They're currently 13th place in the table. So in terms of their current position, they're not far away from what I'm predicting them to be in matchday 46. Ultimately, this video could definitely make me look like a right idiot or a right genius based on what I've seen so far. But Millwall definitely having a very peculiar start, had an alright start, then with a very poor run of form where they had 4 defeats in 5 games. But then they kind of backed it up, winning 2 games in their last 3. So Millwall have definitely got great performances in them. And all I can say, the same problems they had last year are coming back this year. Very, very poor away record. I think they're actually in the bottom 3 in terms of picking up away points. And they really got to work on that. So Gary Rowett needs to really try and figure out a way for Millwall to pick up more away points because they can't keep relying on their home form. And definitely with the big home crowds we're getting this year in the likes of Bramall Lane, the Stadium of Light, you know, Millwall are going to really compete against other teams and fan bases that are really going to bring it. So I definitely think Millwall are going to be very careful now and not necessarily rely too much on their home form there. And I think because they will still do that, I think Millwall will fall slightly short where I think they are capable of, and I think they'll finish 12th place. 11th place in the table for me is Luton Town. I think this section of the table is the trickiest to predict at the moment because all of these teams have had good and bad form, and it's just predicting which team's going to have more good form than bad compared to other teams. And I do think Luton will have an element of a big good revival. They've actually matched their start to the season from last year, and of course last year they ended up in the top 6. But honestly, despite improving their squad, I don't think they're going to have that same momentum that they had around the end of the season where they'll have a good run of form and secure top 6. I think they will fall just short of that, but I think 11th place, considering Luton Town for what they are, is no disgrace. I just think, honestly, for what I've seen so far, bits of Coventry got great chance creating, but in terms of putting the ball in the back of the net, they've been rather lacking with that in some matches as well, where they really, really needed their strikers to be on it. So for me, I think Luton will finish in around 11th place, but as I will regurgitate again, could easily be proven wrong with a really good upright and form. 10th place for me, Blackburn Rovers. Blackburn are currently 7th place in the table, which is a small drop. I do think John Dale Thomason has proven he is a decent manager, and I think his team are performing decently well with his managerial style. I think they have gone into his style a lot quicker and have adapted a lot quicker, and I've got to give the squad for Blackburn Rovers a lot of credit for adapting, because from Mowbray to John Dale Thomason, I think it's quite a contrast, and I've got to say they've done really, really well with that. I do think they'll have a problem with their away record. I've not been very impressed with their away record so far. Blackburn, of course, had a really good start to the season and actually had a good winning streak for quite some time, but then recently they have dropped off with their form with 4 defeats in their last 6. I think as long as they can naturally continue this lose-win streak, I think they will finish still rather high up the table. Because in general in the Championship, we see majority of those teams go through very inconsistent runs of form anyway. So for me, Blackburn will continue that, and I think they'll finish in a decent position in 10th place. 9th place in the table is QPR. This is very strange because I'm still not set on how I feel about QPR this season. It's just, you know, I think Michael Beale is clearly a talented manager. It's clear that, you know, most performances for QPR have been relatively good. They're in the top 6 as of now, as they've won 4 games. They've only lost 3 games actually so far this season as well. And about only losing 1 game in their last 6 as well, which is quite impressive, which was against Swansea City. And they've had some really good victories recently, you know, beating Millwall at home, never easy to get a result at the Den, as I've just mentioned, with Millwall's home form, and beating Watford 3-2 as well, which I remembered when I was in the stadium for Ipswich and Barnsley. It was one of the crazy games going on in the Championship as I was watching Ipswich concede 2 goals to Barnsley. But as a whole, I think QPR, as long as their star players stay fit, they will be right up there. This is just a bit of a risk for me that I think if one of them potentially moves for a transfer or one gets injured, I think they will drop off a bit. So I think just balancing where they are right now, I think QPR will just be within the mix, if that makes sense. So I think they'll stay competitive, but I just don't think they'll particularly have enough momentum and consistency to stay right there in the top 6 in my opinion. So for me, I think they'll finish 9th place. Coming in at 8th place in the table, you're probably wondering, why have I not said Middlesbrough or West Brom yet, considering they're both 22nd and 21st respectively? Well, I think Middlesbrough's going to improve. Middlesbrough will improve. I think, however, they'll finish 8th and not in the top 6. And some people may argue that's controversial with the manager that they got and the squad that they've got. I thought defensively they'd be better than what they've been. They defensively have been quite shambolic. I've had a feeling their goal scoring form would be not quite there, considering that they didn't really, spend a lot of the time getting the striker, and they got Rodrigo Muniz in quite late within the window. I do think Muniz will eventually start getting more confidence, and I think will start chipping in more goals. I don't think Akpom for me is a championship level striker, got to be honest. So I think their striker options is what limiting them as well. But the goals as well, they've conceded 15 goals, and that's not a Chris Wilder typical defence. So I'm very disappointed about the mistakes they're making, the amount of goals they conceded. That's what they really got to work on for me. Coming in at 7th place in the table is Sunderland. I am predicting Sunderland, a team in League One from last year, to be within touching distance in the top 6. They are really reminding me, Sunderland, of what Millwall were like when they were promoted from League One. I can't remember what year it was, 2016, 17, around that year. But when they had their first season returning to the Championship, their home stadium was a fortress, and that big momentum they had really carried them up the table, and they were very unlucky actually to narrowly miss out, and that Millwall side also finished 7th place. So I'm thinking Sunderland are going to finish quite similarly. I think with Alex Neil, they would have had a much better chance of being in the top 6 for me. I think Mowbray, however, has not needed to do too much. I just think these group of players are just such good professionals for Sunderland that they're just still continuing on with a decent form right now. Yes, they've sandwiched a couple more defeats into it, including defeats against Norwich and Middlesbrough, but you'd arguably say on paper those are not bad teams to lose to. And the rest of the time they've picked up some brilliant wins along the way, beating Reading, a team who had a 100% home record, 3-0, beating Rotherham by 3-0. They were a team at that time who not lost a game either. So Sunderland really making things tricky for a lot of these teams, and I definitely think Sunderland got the quality and potential. I think the injury for Ross Stewart is potentially a setback for them, but they have got great options all around the pitch in terms of covering for Ross Stewart's goal. Defensively, they look quite good. I wasn't too convinced of them defensively in their first game against Coventry, but I've seen that they've actually improved their set-piece defending, so they clearly have a good idea how to grow and evolve into the Championship, and I think they've climatised perfectly, I've got to say. I do think they'll narrowly miss out. I think there'll be 6 teams that I think will just hold their own a little bit more and be a little bit more consistent, in my opinion. But Sunderland, 7th place, I think they'll be really, really pleased with that, considering that, they spent 5 years in League One prior to this. 6th place on the table is West Brom. Now, this is actually one of the positions that have not changed in terms of my original predictions. West Brom, who are currently 21st in the table, I'm predicting them to finish 6th place, 15 places higher. Am I going crazy? But honestly, with the performances I've seen of Middlesbrough and West Brom, they're the 2 underperforming teams. Out of Middlesbrough and West Brom, which team I see more likely to recover? For me, West Brom, because I think they've just got more options. Attacking-wise, I definitely think defensively, if they just get a goalkeeper in as well, I just don't think Button is good enough personally. I called it in earlier on, and I think some people were thinking, give Button some credit, but I'm like, well, for me, he's not the number 1 keeper in the Championship, and so far, he's had the worst save percentage with shots faced. So the stats don't lie. Zach Steffen for Middlesbrough is got the 3rd worst save rate percentage with shots faced as well. So if your goalkeeper is going to not save many of the shots facing them, your team's not going to win. And unfortunately, that's what's happened with Middlesbrough and West Brom. Despite both creating the most XG out of their games, they've also have had, with their goalkeepers within the top 3 worst save rate percentages. So they've got to really address that. I think West Brom, if they sort out that back line, which I think is an easier fix than Middlesbrough's defensive problems, then I think West Brom will definitely thrive, because I think their performances, West Brom, have just been really, really good. And I think they've been really unlucky not to get more out of it. And I think if they do move Steve Bruce on, which I think he is on thin ice right now, if they do get a really good level-headed manager in, I think he'll really love working with those squad of players. So for me, I think West Brom will be able to salvage this a little bit more than Middlesbrough would personally. Fifth place on the table, which is I think the biggest change in terms of my top 6 in my early predictions, is Bristol City. Bristol City were a team in around the top half of the table, which I did give them a steady improvement to where I predicted them in previous years. But I've got to say, with their goal scoring form, they look scarily good going forward. Defensively, I'm still a little bit anxious about them. But if they can score as many goals and be within, these amount of games that they have been, they've recently played Norwich and Burnley, 2 teams currently in the top 6, in fact the top 3 I should dare say, and they've only lost out by 1 goal by both of those teams. Teams that you would expect that will be in the top 6 by the end of the season. I think Bristol City are definitely having their standards right. They've definitely got very high standards, and I definitely think now that they're really starting to test those standards, I think they're now, having a lot more accountability if they do fall below those standards. And for me, I think Bristol City have not done that so much this season, and I'm being pleasantly surprised how consistent they've been able to be. They're currently 9th place in the table, and I know they've had those back-to-back defeats, but I did talk about those were 2 away games against Norwich and Burnley. The rest of the time, they've been immaculate with their form, beating Blackburn at home, where Blackburn have had a really good home record at the start of the season. They very comfortably beat Cardiff and Huddersfield, keeping clean sheets in those games as well, which I think is great as well. A vulnerability will be their back line. They also recently drew 3-3 with Blackpool, so I do think that may potentially halt them and maybe a bit of a risk for me predicting them in the top 6. But based on what I've seen going forward, they've definitely got the tools. It's just now going to see if they can replicate that consistency. And for me, I think they might. I think they might actually do it this year. 4th place on the table for me is Watford. Out of the 3 teams relegated from the Premier League from last year, Watford have convinced me the less as of now. They've definitely had the biggest disruption with the transfers, with Dennis leaving, joining Nottingham Forest, of course. They're really pleased that they got João Pedro on a contract. I think it's to 2028, which is an incredible contract for Watford to pull off, considering the talent that they have with João Pedro. I think the signings are starting to improve a little bit, but originally I'm not too sure still about their role within the team. I think definitely recently their away form has been a big problem as well. I don't think Watford have actually won an away game so far this season. Correct me if I'm wrong, guys. They're currently 10th place in the table with only 1 win in their last 6, which was against Middlesbrough, which was a last-minute winner as well. So arguably a bit lucky that they managed to sneak that 1 win within there. So I think Rob Edwards is, we know what it's like with Watford managers and their turnover rates. He's really got to turn us around. But I do think if Watford do dismiss him, I think in general, I think Watford do cope quite well in terms of manager turnover. They don't really typically fall off a cliff. So for me, I think Watford will stay around top 6, but I don't think they'll be within the best of the best. 3rd place for me is Burnley. I've been really impressed with Burnley and company ball at the start of the season. They've definitely been one of my biggest surprises, and it shouldn't really be much of a surprise considering the Burnley team that they've got and the squad that they've got. But I genuinely think the amount of time that company has been able to kind of implement his style and how quickly the players have managed to get into that style, I think is remarkable. I think they've done really, really well, Burnley, to actually really, change those styles, because it's quite an abrupt change. I was talking about recently with Blackburn having to transition from Mowbray to John Dale Thomason, but I don't think you can get an even bigger contrast with Dyche ball and company ball. It's 2 entirely polar opposite ends with possession, chances created, and I think recruitment was really, really good as well. I've been really impressed with the likes of Maatson. I think Benson's been quite decent as well. Vittino's had a couple of decent moments within that squad as well. I think not only have they kept the core of that good Burnley team, but I think they've improved it, and I think Burnley will definitely be right up there, and I think they'll be definitely pushing for the top 2 for the whole way. But for the top 2, the current top 2, Sheffield United and Norwich, I'm also predicting to stay within the top 2. But in my original predictions, I had Norwich first and Sheffield United second. Do I think it'll stay that way? I'm going to say yes, but quite reluctantly. I think Sheffield United this year have really surprised me in a way that they've looked so comfortable, so confident, and so determined. They really do give me a really similar vibe to what Bournemouth gave from last year, when they stayed unbeaten for a long while, thinking that we are definitely going to right the wrong that we had losing out in the playoffs to Brentford last year. And they really attacked the league and they got promoted for it. And I think Sheffield United have got that attitude as well. They know this year, is a really critical year within their development. And with Norwich, I just think their squad is just leagues above. I think Dean Smith has actually kind of underutilised it considering the players he's got. But they have started to turn the screw. I think the players are now starting to find their form. And I think as long as Dean Smith continues rotating his squad in the right way and tinkering with formations correctly, I think Norwich will be able to amass enough points to eventually overtake Sheffield United. Could even be with a one-off match against each other as well, which will be incredibly exciting for a Championship neutral. Okay, guys, so that is my changed table for the Championship. So I think I'm liking this table a little bit more than my early table predictions, although that is subject to change, especially as we've got over 36 games left to play and, within over 8 months of football still left to play as well. A lot can definitely change. But guys, thank you guys so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. If you guys enjoyed the video today, please give the video a like. It just reminds you of the channel. Please do hit the subscribe button if you've not done so. That really helps the channel as well. And please share this channel too. That really helps the growth of this channel as well. That'll wrap it up. Thank you guys so much for watching. You guys are legendary for joining in this video. And as always, I'll see you guys soon. Take care, everyone.